Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to go ahead and confess something right now, something that you may find surprising, you may find shocking, you may decide that you don't like me because of what I'm about to say, and actually I'm okay with that. I've come to learn that not everybody in this world likes me, mainly because, most of the guys, they just want to be like me. And most of the women are sad that, they don't get to come home to this every... Okay, never mind. But I am going to say something that I think you'll find a little surprising, especially for a minister. And if you'll let me explain why I'm going to say what I'm about to say. But I'll go ahead and say it first, and then you can judge, and then we can talk a little bit about it. As a general rule, and I know you're going to judge me, but let me talk about this. As a general rule, I'm not a big fan. Now, I'm not a hater, but I'm not a big fan of many of the Christian movies that are out today. And I know this sounds terrible, and you're like, oh, you're a terrible person for not liking that. And I can't offer a better alternative. Okay, so if you want to compare it to what else you have to watch on TV, yes, it's better. But shameless plug, not for me, but for the series The Chosen is an exception. It's one that I absolutely love. And I don't think you're a better Christian if you watch it, but I think if you watch the Chosen series, I think it will mean a lot to you. It has just impacted me and made me even more excited to think about the life that Jesus lived, the people who followed him, the mistakes that they made, and the way that he loved people through their difficulties. In fact, there's 2 seasons out. You can get them on YouTube. They have an app where you can get them. I just loaned out a DVD of just season 1, and somebody just gave that back. So it's sitting over there on that pew. If somebody wants to watch season 1 of The Chosen, I can give it to you, and you can watch it on your DVD player. For those of you who still have one of those are kind of the thing of the past, like thumb drives and cassette tapes and 8 tracks. But I have that if you would like that. So I really do love that. And I couldn't really figure out why I didn't like most of the Christian movies that are out. And as I was going through this study, I think I kind of figured out one of the reasons why they bother me a little bit. And I know this sounds terrible. And I know it's movies and it's how story works, right? Is that you get the background, then you have, the climax and then the resolution. The problem is that for whatever reason, they just end up being a little too tidy for me. And that's not bad. Because I know in the end, God is going to win. But it's just the fact that we shove that into a 90-minute movie. And all of those, it seems like everything works out perfectly in the end. They catch the big fish. They win the big game. The marriage is back together. The cancer goes away. And it's all of those, like, things are terrible. And then I surrendered to Jesus. And then everything got better. And I love that, except for the fact that, 1, that never happens in 90 minutes. And 2, sometimes that just doesn't happen at all. That there are people who surrender their lives to God And they don't have this turnaround where the wife comes back or the boss says, oh, you're right. I'm going to give you your job back and you get a raise. Or, the knuckleheads that you're coaching don't all of a sudden get it figured out and they win the World Series, the Little League World Series. Or in the last movie we watched, which, is a pretty good movie overall. But I mean, it turned out in the end, it's like, all you have to do is pray, and then you end up in a fishing tournament and you catch, a 400-pound fish and you get, $200,000 for it. And those stories happen, but it just seems like those are always kind of how it goes. Like, it's really rough, you pray to God, and then everything gets fixed. And I think what is difficult is that there's a lot of people who are in that place where they're like, I've prayed to God, I've been faithful to God, and it's not working out. The movies say it should work out. The preacher on TV says it should work out. And if it's not working out, then I'm doing something wrong. But I think the fact is that we are in a very, very broken world that's full of evil. And some days we are victims of that evil, and sometimes we are perpetrators of evil. We've been on both sides of that. And if you're self-aware and honest, you will say, you know what? I have been on the side of evil before. And it does, in fact, exist. And so I'm not here to say that you should stop watching those movies, or you should get rid of your prayer room, or stop or war room, or I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I want us to be reminded that it doesn't always get all neat and tidy. And if we get stuck into believing that, then we either think we have a big problem or God has a big problem with us. And so that's where I want to go today. We're going to look for just a moment at Luke 23. And real quickly, what I want us to do is I want us to talk about the role of the apostles, the followers of Jesus in Luke 23. We read the first 25 verses. Did you catch what the apostles were doing at this time? Is there any indication? Do we know what's going on right now with the apostles? I just ask this, where are they?
Are they around anywhere?
Are they around anywhere? It doesn't seem like it. I'm just repeating what you're saying. Yeah. Because I agree with you. Luke 23, we don't have any mention of the followers of Jesus. And I want to use that in quotes. Because what does a follower do? Just in the very basic definition, what does a follower do? A follower. Are you a follower if you're not following? Are they followers because they're not following? Let me just give you a super fast recap of what's happened prior to Luke 23. And this is just like the hours leading up to it. This is not the last 3 years. It's just the hours leading up to it. They went with Jesus to have the Passover meal. And while they're there, they argued about who was better than who. They went to the garden and Jesus asked them to pray, and they fell asleep. One of them showed up and betrayed Jesus. Another one pulled out his sword and tried to decapitate one of the guys. They all ended up running somewhere away. One of them without his clothes. That's how bad he wanted to get away. And then they're kind of lurking around. At least Peter is lurking around close enough to where he can see Jesus, but far enough away so he's not being accused. Well, he is accused of being with him. At least he's not indicted. And ultimately, he lies. He calls down curses and says, I don't even know this man. The rooster crows. And then he goes out and he weeps bitterly. That's what we have going on with these guys. Luke 23, Jesus is in the worst moments of his life, and he is alone because his friends left him. 3 years of eating and following and listening and praying and crying, consoling and counseling. laughing, sharing life, and just in a moment, they are gone. And we call ourselves followers of Jesus. In my mind, I try to liken myself to the life of Jesus. I see the way that he lived. I read about how the way that he treated people, the way that he spoke to them. I see the way that he sacrificed. And I'm like, oh yes, that's what I want to be like. But the fact is, I'm more like his apostles than I am like him. Like the apostles that are bumbling and confused, they're waffling, they're doubting, they're lying, they're running. That really describes me more than it does the one who shows mercy and kindness and love and patience. And so I just wonder, where does that leave me? And then you add into the mix of all of this is that life is just really, really hard. It's difficult. And what do we do when it doesn't turn out like the movies say it should? When things don't just get better, how do we handle that? How do we deal with it? Okay, so the one thing that I stand by wholeheartedly is the Bible. I believe it's the inspired Word of God, but there are also other sources in which we glean information from that are not in the text itself. And some of them are books, some of them are facts, some of them are from history. And the one that I want to share with you today is something like all those others, except the Bible itself, is that there are some things that I agree with and some things I don't agree with. And this particular individual, we're going to watch a video for just a minute. He is very interesting. I like most of what he says, but there are definitely some things that I don't like about what he says. He's somewhat of a political figure, and so he does talk about politics, but he also talks a lot about spirituality. He talks about being a theist, one who believes in God. And so you may be familiar with some of his works. If you're on YouTube, you've probably seen a clip or two of his. That's where I got this from. He's also written a book. I've shared with you some of his points from that book. His name is Jordan Peterson. And so some of you may say, oh yeah, I've listened to this guy, I like him. Some of you say, I've heard some of this guy's stuff, he's a nut, I don't like him. But I will say this, more than anything else, I'm from the South, I'm from Texas. It's obvious I'm from Texas. I say ain't and y'all, and somehow I can stretch out any one syllable word into 3 syllables. And this guy, Jordan Peterson, is from Canada. And so he has a very unusual accent. I suspect there are times that he says "eh," and he just has, but he's really interesting. And he's going to bring up a subject that I think is really important for us to think about suffering. And then what do we do with it? The clip is 6 minutes and 45 seconds. Hang in there. Try to listen. He is a very heady person. And there's a lot of times I'll watch some of his clips and I'll be like, either I have to watch that 4 more times, grab a dictionary, or just wave the white flag because I'll never figure it out. But this one I think is something that if you just kind of hang in with, I think you'll find it pretty interesting. And then we're going to talk a little bit about his whole premise of that. So is anybody up in the loft? I don't see any heads. I don't think we have to do this, but if we dim the lights, if you promise not to fall asleep, nobody's making that promise? No one? Say there. Okay, it's 6 minutes. He can't be any worse. He's a lot better than what you'd get 6 minutes from me. So good luck. This is that song. Okay.
Life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. you voluntarily accept it, and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life. No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. So if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe we're never married. Because the rule is, you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you can do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. You know, people find such meaning in the responsibilities they drop. It stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't the time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. You know, it's like you're like a what do you call it? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism. It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like, it glistens in front of you, and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse, and see how far you get. So I thought, to bring full closure to the class, I was trying to solve this terrible puzzle that confronted me and many other people about how it was that human beings got themselves in such a tangle about what they believed. Such a tangle that we were pointing the ultimate weapons of destruction at one another, which, by the way, we are still doing. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. We need our belief systems. They orient us. And that means there will be conflict between belief systems, and that can be a catastrophe. And that's being played out everywhere, again, in very many ways. What's the solution to that? Well, one possibility is there's no solution. It's just mayhem all the way around. It could be the case. But it seemed to me, as I delved into it, that the proper solution to that was to live properly. As an individual. Because you're more powerful than you think. Way more powerful than you think. I mean, God only knows what you are in the final analysis. You're blind to your own weaknesses, but you're also blind to your own strengths. And so then I think, well, if you got your act together, it would be better for you, and instantly it would be better for your family, assuming they wanted you to get your act together, not everyone does, and then it would be better for the community. It's like, how far can you take that? If you stop wasting time, if you stop lying, if you oriented yourself to the highest possible good that you could conceive of, and you committed to that, how much good could you do? Well, I would say, why don't you find out? So that's what I think you should do. You should find out. You don't have anything better to do. And there's nothing in it, as far as I can be able to tell. There's nothing in it but good. So maybe you could sort yourself out so that you wanted nothing but the good. And then maybe you can help make that manifest in the world. And maybe we wouldn't have all these terrible problems today. At least we'd have fewer of them, and that would be a start. So it's the answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. That's the answer. So, and states that are predicated on that realization are healthy. So, and states that aren't are doomed to stagnation and catastrophic collapse. And personalities that are predicated on self-tyranny and the tyranny of others are doomed to collapse.
Okay, so again, he's a little heady, but there's some things that we can get out of this that I think that are really important. The first thing that he really points out is this: life is suffering. Okay, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about a life full of suffering? And he basically says, well, you can be mad about it, you can be angry about it. There's other videos, other times in his writings, he talks about, well, one thing you can go to cynicism. Okay, because you live in this naivety of everything is great, everything is good, everything will work out. And then when it doesn't, ultimately you realize, okay, this is not good. And so you learn that, and that can take you to a place of cynicism where you're just angry. And then what he'll go on to say is, yeah, do that and see what happens, because the people and things that made your life worse, cynicism will make it worse and make you worse and make it worse. And there is no end to this. That's why they refer to hell as being a bottomless pit, because you can always continue to get worse and worse and worse. And so what do you do in a life that is full of suffering? And there's something more than just this moralism that he's talking about. But I mean, this is something very important. And I absolutely love this. He says, listen, you're all in. And the only response is you might as well do something while you're waiting, because this is going to kill you. What we're doing now it's going to end. And so what are we left with? And he takes on he's like, you know what? You can make a difference. And he says, only God knows our weaknesses, but only God knows our strengths and what we can do. And so he believes that if you are sitting in the ash heap and you're thinking about all the terrible things that are going on, he says, you know what? There is an alternative. You can actually do something about it, and you can try to be that good, not only to yourself, but also to others. So then the question has to be asked is why would we even try this? How much better can life be? And his response is, well, you don't know until you try. What happens if you reorient the way you think life and the way that you treat other people? What if your perception of life is not about how you're the one who's supposed to be happy and entertained and loved, and you realize that you're the one who's supposed to be the one who loves others, who shows kindness, that it's not on the waitress to serve you, it's upon you to show kindness and to serve them? What happens, men, if you really take seriously the fact that you're married to the woman that you have promised to, and that you're going to be faithful to her and honor her and help her in her walk. What happens? And his response is, you don't know until you try. What happens if we have a generation that decides that what is on our phone is not more important than the person who's sitting next to us? What happens? What happens when we get in our vehicle and drive down the road and we can realize that the vehicles around us are filled with people who are in cars, who have lives, who have families, who have hurts, who have scars, and they're just moving right along with us. And they are not an obstacle in our way to reaching our destination. But quite possibly, there's someone who needs to know God and who needs to be loved and served by people like us. What would happen? I think about this a lot of times when I'm on the road, and I think of it in a kind of a different sense. I don't know why I think about this. And this is just maybe a little bit more of my personality. This is not necessarily a spiritual trait. This doesn't mean anything different about who I am. But in my mind, I want to be a rule follower. I don't always achieve it. I rarely achieve it. Most days I fail miserably. But I want to be a rule follower. And so, especially when it comes to driving, I'm a rule follower. And I'm not trying to push this on anyone. I'm not saying that, you're a sinner if you go 5 over or 15 over. Or if you go back in time in your DeLorean when you hit 88 down Lovington High. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, for me, my thought is, if I can follow the laws, then I might can contribute to the safety of the roads that we drive on. In my mind, I can argue that. I can argue, as with most law enforcement officers will tell you, is that, and I can't even remember what they call it, but they don't call accidents. We call them accidents. And I've forgotten the term that they use, but one of them told me one time, we don't call them accidents because they're not accidents. Because somebody was breaking the law, and they were almost always doing that intentionally. And that's why things happen the way they do. And I've imagined in my own mind, what would driving be like? How would life be drastically changed if people started doing something really simple like following the laws that we have for our roads? And you could think about this, and I have more than I should. But if people really stopped at stop signs, if people really drove the speed limit, if people really didn't talk on their phone or text while they were driving, if they didn't drink while they were driving or drive after they had been drinking, what if they didn't try to see how close they could get to the rear bumper of the car in front of them? Like they're drafting them like this is some kind of NASCAR race in which they're going to shoot ahead of them. What if people actually started doing that? What would happen? There would be a lot less accidents. We're talking about now the accidents that we're having is probably down to 1% of what it was, maybe 0.1% of what it was, until we truly only have these freaks of nature that happen, like a tire blowing out. But then you're thinking, what happens if that were to happen? How many people would still be alive? How many hospitals would be empty? How many kids would still have parents to come home to if people didn't drink and drive and text and drive and have road rage? It's just amazing. Our insurance would drop down to almost nothing. And we'd hardly have to pay insurance because they'd never hardly have to pay out a claim. Hospitals would be empty. Medical bills would drop down. I mean, like all these drastic things would happen. But where does it start? I can't believe I'm quoting this guy. I wrote this down. I can't believe it. Michael Jackson. What does Michael Jackson say? Where does he start? At least he sings, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. Now, there's absolutely almost nothing of that man's life that I would agree with, but I do agree with that phrase. And this is what Jordan Peterson is talking about. Like you can have an impact. But the first thing you have to do is you just have to flat out say, life stinks and it's full of suffering. And God is good and life is full of suffering. And you have to come to grips with those two things. This whole study that we've been doing, what you meant for evil, God intended for good, is based on a guy who over and over and over again, if he could say anything, if he could write anything, he would be, life is suffering. What kind of personal trauma is involved with having 12 other siblings in your family, 11 boys and brothers and a sister, 10 of which hate you and came from a different mother. The one real full brother that you have is younger than you and is absolutely cuddled, babied, and coddled by your dad because your mother died when he was born. I mean, let's just say that's the start of your life. You have no mother, she died. And you have 10 brothers who hate you and want to kill you. Literally want to kill you. They planned to, it's not like they had this fleeting thought in their mind. They had a plan to kill you. And ultimately they said, let's just get the money from you. And so think about this. You are being hauled off in chains. You're probably having to walk, being pulled behind, away from your home because your brothers sold you. And things are going to go good. And then they're going to go really, really bad. And the only reason that they went really, really bad is because you did what was right. And when Joseph was once again cornered by Potiphar's wife, and she says, come to bed with me. Do you remember what he says? How could I sin against God? And the good, gracious, loving, merciful God who watched his servant say, I will not sin against my God, let him go to jail. And it's almost more frustrating that God is ever present in the life of Joseph. It's almost would be easier if Joseph could just say, there is no God, this life is terrible, and I'm tired of it all. But then God still continues to show up in little but profound ways, like when the two guys end up in jail, and they say, we have these dreams. And Joseph says, yeah, God gave me the answer to those dreams. I can interpret them for them. So God is still in relationship with Joseph. Joseph knows this. And where is Joseph, by the way? He's in prison. Life is suffering. And if you're Joseph, you should just say, you know what? This stinks, God. I'm out. You should be doing good things for me. Like, I've lost my mother. My brothers tried to kill me. I got sold into slavery. I did what you wanted, and now I'm in jail. Thanks, God. Thanks, but no thanks. And he honors God and tells him the dream, which, by the way, he's in jail, and he has this conversation with these guys. You remember how that whole conversation got started? Because they're moping around. The guy who lost his mom, hasn't seen his dad, sold by his brothers, thrown into prison by a boss that he was faithful to, and God has left him in there to rot, looks around and sees other people suffering. And this is what Jordan Peterson is talking about. You don't know what can happen until you just try it. Like, this is your only shot in life. This one is it. It's not going to happen again. This is your one chance. You are all in. Why not be all in? And Joseph decides that he's not going to sit around and stare at his navel and play his violin about how terrible life is. Instead, he's looking around and notices other people are suffering too. And they have that conversation, they get out, and of course, what happens? He is forgotten again. And it all continues until ultimately we know the story that Pharaoh has this dream. And I love how Joseph goes to him and Pharaoh says, hey, I understand you can interpret dreams. And I don't know how long he waited, but he said, no, I can't do it. I don't know if he stopped. I don't know if he took a breath. I would think that he got the next sentence out pretty quickly because I don't think Pharaoh had a whole lot of patience. He says, no, I can't do it, but the God I serve can. And he tells him his dream. And we know how that story goes on until ultimately his brothers are in front of him. And all the dreams that he had as a kid had come true. Those dreams that had turned into a nightmare of a life. And now this was his opportunity to get back at him. And I think he struggled with this way more than we think about. I think he really wrestled with what he's going to do and how he feels about his brothers. It's interesting how life works like that, doesn't it? How you can be so deeply hurt by someone, and over time, you kind of think you forgive them, and you think you forget, maybe even work to do that. And you get to a place where when you think of your name, you don't shudder or twitch or, want to punch them. You don't just always think about how can I get back at them. And you get to that place where life moves on. And life moves on for Joseph. And then all of a sudden, just like that, he's thrown right back into the middle of this. And he sees his brothers. And I think, remember, the last image he had of his brothers was either one looking up into a well as they're pushing him down, as they're forcing him down in there, and he falls down into this well. The last memories he have of his brothers is him screaming and begging to get out of that well. Or when he turns around and looks after they've just bartered over how much he was worth to get rid of. As they were splitting up the coins that they got for his life and laughing about it. Those were the last images that Joseph would have had of his brothers until they walked back in again. And he immediately recognizes them. They don't recognize him. And life is suffering. And now Joseph can be cynical. And he can now get the revenge that he wanted. Literally, his dreams are coming true. They are bowing down before him. And this is the great I told you so moment. This is, I knew you would pay for what would happen while you were living at home, while you were eating at the table with my dad. I was stuck in prison. In a country I'd never been before, among people whose language I had to learn. Life is suffering. But it just seems to me like the one thing that Joseph kept doing is what Jordan Peterson implores all people to do. Is to just live the best life that you can. And then see what happens. See if anything changes. I've shared this story before, but I think it's worth repeating just because I want you to be reminded that that we all go through some times where it's painful, and even if you're a minister, you not only go through painful times, but sometimes you perpetuate those places that you're in, and you can stay in those places of hurt and anger longer than you need to because of your own actions. And that describes where I was about 10 years ago, is that I was in a place of hurt. I was in a place of anger. I was in a place of righteous indignation. And I can't tell you, I'm not proud of this, but I did not pray for good things to happen to those people. I did not pray that God would be with their families, with their marriages, with their businesses. I wanted to watch their lives fall apart. And I wanted to say, you know what? They deserve that. And I'm so glad they're getting it. And it was a terrible, terrible place for me. The first few weeks were shock. The next few weeks were confusion, and then I literally tried to build a house in the valley of anger, and I just loved being there. All I would do in my mind is retell those moments where I was wronged, and every time I did it, I made them worse and worse and worse, and I hated them more and more and more. And they went from people who said some things that were hurtful to I turned them into monsters, and their families were monsters, and anybody who talked to them were monsters. And it absolutely just destroyed me inside. And I can remember going to class. I was in Sweetwater. I had a 40-minute drive to Abilene. Most days, Mike, I was on two wheels and I was riding there. But by the time I got through, like my arms would be hurting because I'd be squeezing the grips so hard because I would go over that was like my favorite 40 minutes of therapy was going over how I was hurt. And I know this is terrible. I would leave Sweetwater, like somewhat in like a rational state. And by the time that I walked into class, I had told that story in my mind for about the fifth time, and I was literally ready to fight somebody. And I would walk into class with other kids, college students, young guys, and like I was just looking for somebody to say something so I could just, at least in my mind, completely judge them and tear them down to nothing. And it just ruined me. And Peterson says, okay, you have two options. You can recognize that they're suffering and you can be cynical as I was, or you can try to move on. You can realize that you can make a difference in this world. And the way that you treat your wife, and the way that you treat your kids, and the way that you treat the people around you, like this is your one shot to do it. And why not give it a shot? Why not say, you know what? Today, I'm going to be the best husband that I can be. I'm going to be the best servant that I can be to the people I come in contact with. I'm going to show kindness and patience and exhibit joy and just kind of watch what happens. Just do an experiment. Just this week. Sunday's not entirely over yet, but so the rest of today and the 6 days that follow, just say, you know what, I'm gonna focus my life on being the best follower of Jesus that I can. Just this week, just do an experiment, because you don't know what's going to happen until you try. But just think, what would happen if all my interactions with people was framed in the light of I am going to follow Jesus the best way that I can, and just find out what happens. How long will it take before your spouse realizes that maybe they're living with a different person? What happens if, you don't lay on the horn when you're going down the road? What could possibly happen with that? We're almost out of time, and so I want to leave you with that. But I want to add on one more thing, and this is something that we came across when we were reading Robert Morgan's book, Red Sea Rules. And this is the one thing I took from that book more than anything else, although I really loved it. He said, be more concerned about God's glory than for your deliverance. And so as we find ourselves suffering, think about how can God be glorified, not how can he get me out of this mess? And I think when we realize that, I think it might change, and we might be able to do some good that might change everything. And at the very least, it can change us. Even if the people around us don't really like the new us, it still can be glorifying to God. So let's close out in prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father God, I thank you for giving us this opportunity. Lord, I just pray that as we heard today, that we will remember that we are all in, and that this is all going to kill us, and that this is our opportunity to give glory to you. This is our one shot. And so, Lord, I pray that we will do that we will live lives that really model, that imitate, that reflect who you are and what you have created us and called us to be. Lord, that is not easy because we live in a broken world full of suffering. But I just pray that we will be reminded that we can glorify you, and ultimately that you will be the one who delivers us. And we thank you for that deliverance. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen. Don't forget this Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we're going to meet together and have a meal, and then we will have class time at 6:30. You're dismissed.